You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
That makes me Bill Thomas.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode. And we've got some interesting episodes coming up for you, so we figured maybe we'd tell you what all you can expect coming up on these next couple episodes of Mind Over Murder. One of the questions that we get most frequently on the social media pages is about liberty security. So we've decided, in the best interests of everybody and their curiosity, we would do a whole entire episode on liberty security, its denizens, its connections to various victims. So we have devoted quite an interesting and entertaining evening compiling an episode for you good folks about liberty security. So look for that coming up.
This conversation with Joyce and Chris, where some of these issues come up, we then segue into liberty security. This includes a almost legendary letter that Ron Little, one of the owners of Liberty Security, sent to the media in 1989, which we've received a ton of questions about. And the letter itself is pretty hysterical, and we'll make a point of attaching copies of the letter to our social media pages and to the show notes for this upcoming episode. It really is fascinating.
Oh, I think we should go one step further. I think we need a bonus episode with a dramatic reading of the letter.
All right, that's something to think about. That would be kind of fun. I would say we could read alternating paragraphs, but the fascinating thing is that there are no paragraphs.
There are no paragraphs. It is 7 straight pages of no paragraphs.
Kind of a rant almost.
Yeah. The English teacher feels very strongly that this is not something I would have taken from my students.
7 pages of just intense. I mean, it's in English. You can pick up what he's talking about. He just goes on and on and on in all sorts of very interesting ways. I think you're going to enjoy it. So that's next week on Mind Over Murder. And I guess we'll have to think about that bonus episode, won't we?
I think so. We also have fan favorite returning guest, FBI profiler and forensic linguist, Jim Fitzgerald, who's going to be back with us for another episode.
Kristin was threatening to call him F. Scott Fitzgerald because apparently you've been teaching about F. Scott Fitzgerald this week in school.
Yeah, this week it's been nothing but The Great Gatsby for all my classes. And we were discussing before going on the air that we needed to call, and I nearly said F. Scott Fitzgerald instead of Jim Fitzgerald. So I should probably not make that mistake when we're recording with him.
He probably can't be insulted to be referred to as F. Scott Fitzgerald.
I don't think so. And then after we have Jim Fitzgerald on, we are going to get to the other 2 cases in the Colonial Parkway Murders series. We are going to spend time on the Virginia State Police cases of Robin Edwards and David Knobling, Anna Maria Phelps, and Daniel Lauer. Some things to look forward to in the coming episodes of Mind Over Murder.
So you were recommending a 48-hour special, which I have not yet seen, despite our mutual interest here. So it's on my list. Tell our listeners about it.
Well, 48 Hours did, and they've already done 1 episode on the Kristin Smart case, but I think they felt it important to do a follow-up considering the arrest of Paul and Ruben Flores. So earlier this week, a 48-hour special about the Kristin Smart case was released. It has lots of really excellent interviews and footage with Chris Lambert, the podcaster behind Your Own Backyard, which is an excellent podcast. And if you have not listened to it, we highly recommend that you do so. The 48-hour special runs about an hour, 45 minutes without commercials. If you're somebody who has never seen the Cal Poly area, someone who is not familiar with the San Luis Obispo area, it actually gives you a sense of place. And there's a lot of wonderful interviews with family friends of the Smarts. Kristin Smart's sister also agreed to be interviewed for this. And there is some very interesting and enlightening information about Paul and Ruben Flores, let's just say. So I would recommend watching it. I really enjoyed it. We think you all will too. So check out the 48-hour special that recently dropped, an update to the Kristin Smart case.
In other true crime news, our friends at Othram have been on quite a roll lately. We're just going to talk about two cases that they recently were involved in, significant solves. The first is a case involving a murder victim named Janet Lee Lucas, who was murdered in 1985 near Missoula, Montana. And actually, a bear hunter found her remains. They thought she'd been killed about a year before her remains were found. She was referred to by local law enforcement as Crystal Creek, referencing...
Mouthful.
It is. Try to say it three times fast. What law enforcement was doing, though, was differentiating between different sets of remains that had been found, another one near Deer Creek, and they believed that these people were victims of Wayne Nance, a serial killer who operated in the area, who was killed in 1986 during one of his several home invasions. Apparently, in this example, the homeowners defended themselves and shot Wayne Nance to death. They suspect that Nance is involved in a number of different murders, but for 36 years, Crystal Creek was unidentified. Othram was brought in after a number of other DNA labs had failed in their effort, and they were ultimately able to identify her as Janet Lee Lucas. To this point, they're still not certain exactly how Janet Lee Lucas ends up in Missoula, Montana, but of course now they have a starting point, which is they have a victim's name, family members they can speak to, and they're trying to trace her steps backwards from Spokane to her untimely demise in Missoula, Montana. Also this week, Othram was involved in a 1995 murder victim in Beaumont, Texas, Mary Catherine Edwards. Great news in this example, through forensic genealogy and Othram's forensic-grade genomic sequencing, they have identified a suspect has been arrested in her murder. She was working as a teacher, and it turns out she was a bridesmaid at this man's wedding a decade before, and somehow he had continued to track her in some way. Hopefully, this suspect will have more to say when he is returned to Texas. Currently, he's incarcerated in Ohio, and he'll be remanded back to Texas to face trial.
So bravo to our friends at Othram. We are so proud of the work that you're doing. And of course, it heartens us a great deal when we hear about cases from the 80s being solved, because we hold out a lot of hope that the Colonial Parkway murders will eventually be solved as well. So hope springs eternal for us and for the other family members in the Colonial Parkway murders. Thank you so much for all of your ratings and your reviews and your kind words and your questions on social media. Please do keep it up. We love hearing from you, and we hope that you're enjoying the podcast as much as we are enjoying making it. Thank you so much for listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time. And we are joined again by Chris Call and Joyce Call Canada, siblings of Keith Call. Joyce and Chris, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
I have to give you guys a lot of credit. You're getting along extremely well for siblings. I would say, the squabbling has been kept to a minimum. The insults,
As we get older, it's easier.
I find I get along with my siblings better as we get older, too. When we left off, you all were at a very interesting place in talking about some of your discomfort about the National Park Service Rangers. I just wanted to touch base regarding that. We're not going to name names because we want to be fair. If there's 150 persons of interest in the Colonial Parkway murders, obviously they can't all be involved in these cases. For the record, there are 4 National Park Service rangers who were working at the Colonial Parkway, which is a national park, in 1986 to 1989, who were then also working at the Shenandoah National Park in 1996 when Julie Williams and Lolly Winans were murdered, and that's the couple that Chris mentioned in our last podcast. At least one of those 4 rangers, there's 3 men and a woman, and actually 2 of them are a married couple, both rangers. At least one of the rangers is considered a person of interest, or was. And again, we're not going to name names, but he was actually given a lie detector test and was regarded as a fairly high-level potential suspect. From what we've been told by law enforcement, he's never been charged, and we're not saying he's guilty of anything. But no one is cleared in an unsolved homicide until the case is solved. So at least potentially, one of these 4 National Park Service rangers could be involved in the Colonial Parkway murders. Chris, you were saying you thought their behavior was odd and unprofessional in terms of your interaction with the National Park Service?
Yeah, I definitely feel, especially the day that we found out Keith and Cassandra they were missing from their car. I felt that they were very, especially the one park ranger, very inappropriate, very unprofessional, and very non-caring. I mean, literally, I was talking to him, and he wasn't even making any eye contact or anything. It's like he didn't want to hear it. That just sounded some alarms with me.
And this was the guy you thought looked like he'd been up all night or was hungover?
Yes.
Eyes
hungover, bloodshot. Looked like he'd been doing something all night long. Yes. Mm-hmm. Never forget it.
Joyce, did you have any perceptions of the National Park Service from any interaction you had with the rangers or others?
No, I didn't talk to any of them at all at that point. I don't know if that's when Chris talked to him, I wasn't there yet, or I don't remember being there. But what I do remember was Chris bringing that up to me when I got there or soon after, because it was an issue from the very beginning. And he has, always talked about that. That really is something that I think I don't know if I want to use the word scar, but it's always going to be there. He's always remembered that. And so, I believe my brother, and something like that's bothered him all those years. I believe it.
Chris, you've also mentioned that you had heard that the FBI wasn't called in at the beginning of the disappearance, that some time had elapsed.
To the best of my knowledge, the Park Service didn't put 2 and 2 together. Remember, there's another couple that was killed like a year, your sister, like a year prior, and it was an FBI case. And here we have a very similar situation. And how far were the cars apart? A mile, a half a mile? Mm-hmm. And they didn't think about calling the FBI because your sister's case was very big news.
And my first reaction, this is years ago now, when I went to the 2 sites, the Cheatham Annex Overlook where Kathy's car was found, and then the York River Overlook a mile or so away where Keith's car was found, my first reaction in getting out of the rental car and looking at the scenes was how remarkably similar they are. They're both along the York River, kind of an area where you would pull your car off, you could park there, but they felt very, very similar. I, to this day, cannot figure out how the National Park Service investigative rangers didn't think to contact the FBI. As you said, Chris, a year and a half prior, 2 young women had been found brutally murdered just down the road. You just say to yourself, what? Nobody thought maybe to let the FBI know we have a young couple that's gone missing in a very similar site a mile or so away from where those 2 young women were murdered? It just boggles the mind.
What I think is also, it's like they didn't want the FBI to know about it, because if it's going to open up a whole other can of worms. I mean, if they were involved or not, but it seems like maybe I'm just saying that perhaps they were or knew something about it. They don't want the FBI involved in something like this. And they had to have knowledge and remember about your sister's case. No one that lived in Virginia didn't know about it, I don't think, at least in Eastern Virginia.
And with regard to the National Park Service, especially in more recent years, Joyce, I know you had a not particularly pleasant experience when your family wanted to bring in some cadaver dogs to look for Keith and Sandy's remains along the parkway. The National Park Service did not respond terribly well to that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I just remember they did not want to let us use the parkway. We had to get permission. We had to get some kind of paperwork signed. And I think that it took a couple of go-rounds, and we had to raise a little bit of stink before they would even let us do that. And I just don't even understand why wouldn't they want to promote themselves as helping these families instead of being a hindrance to the families? It's not like that we were going to go out and destroy their parkway or anything. We just wanted to see if we could find some type of remains of Keith and Sandy. So, yeah, that did not leave a good taste.
My understanding is they threw up roadblock after roadblock trying to prevent the families from being allowed to search on the parkway with the cadaver dogs.
They did. But we prevailed.
Joyce, did the news have to get involved with that? I don't remember.
I don't think the news got involved before it happened. I don't think they did, but I think some phone calls were made on behalf of us, but it wasn't public.
Yeah, the Park Service seemed to be more concerned at the time, from what I remember you explaining to me, about grass and earth being disturbed, as if a group of cadaver dogs and their handlers walking through the woods was going to be somehow this terribly disruptive thing. I mean, the only time you'd even do any digging was if the dogs hit on something and then they sit down and send their signal that they've found something to their handlers. The whole thing seemed absurd. It was like the National Park Service has never been terribly helpful with Keith and Sandy's disappearance and the rest of the Colonial Parkway murders. And it was as if, that might disturb our sacred parkland when we're talking about people just walking through the woods.
I know, you're absolutely right. I think that, they just didn't want bad publicity. They didn't want people to be riding by saying, what are they doing on the parkway and why are they there? And the reason why they're there is because we all know why we're there. I don't think that they wanted it brought up again. They don't like it. It's a bad mark. That's the way I feel.
Well, I think a lot of people might see it as being bad for tourism. Mm-hmm. And it isn't like we asked for this. It happened and we all have to live with it, and we're still trying to look for answers. But I've always felt that institutions like Colonial Williamsburg, William and Mary as a college, and the National Park Service and the Colonial Parkway, I think they always wanted to put their institutional interests ahead of ours as families and didn't care to cooperate with us or help us in any way. They just wanted to distance themselves. I should probably throw the United States Navy and the Naval Academy in the mix here, too, because they did everything they could to distance themselves from Kathy and Becky's murder as well. It's like, oh, no, we don't want to talk about that. They wanted to just paper the whole thing over and not talk about it ever again.
Act like it didn't happen.
But as you said earlier, Chris, the news media coverage actually did help us in terms of increasing leverage for the families.
Oh, most definitely. The news coverage it's helped in so many ways with this case from the beginning up until present day. And I remember especially when with the crime scene photos, if you remember that, how important Andy Fox and the guy from the CBS network.
Mike Mather.
Mike Mather.
Both of them are awesome. They've done so much good work for their cases. It's amazing.
And I think the Daily Press, Mike Holtzclaw and other reporters at the Daily Press and any number of other publications have really stepped up and kept that media focus on the case.
I've almost felt a little guilty in a sense of the cases like us. We've been so fortunate to get so much news coverage from beginning to end. Then you hear about so many other murder cases who don't get the same coverage. But I guess because ours is 4 couples sort of in lovers' lane situations on, FBI involved, I guess maybe it seems more intriguing. But we've been so fortunate to get lots of news coverage. And there's so many murders that happen literally every day and nothing, so interesting, take on it.
I think a lot of that credit, though, has to go back in particular to the Call and Hailey families. And one of the things Kristin and I wanted to talk about was your innovative use of social media. We touched on this a little bit in the last episode. To our knowledge, I don't know if you realized it at the time, but you are the first families that we are aware of anywhere in the country to use social media to drive awareness of a missing person or potential homicide situation. Did you ever stop to think about the fact that you were the first?
Joy was the one who really did it. I can't take any credit for that. She's the one who started it. She was determined, so I'm very proud of her.
I just didn't know what else to do at the time. And it was just a tool because I felt so helpless. I felt helpless. And I'm like, gosh, what can we do just to start getting the word out there again and maybe start getting some help? I just started, made the Facebook page and started putting pictures and stories out. And then you came along, Bill, Thank the Lord.
Tell us the names of your social media pages.
Well, it is What Happened to Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. This was all new to me. I was just learning how to do this stuff back then. And I wanted to make sure that his name was out there and that her name was out there. And I don't know what I was doing. I was just trying. I was determined to try anything because I would lay there sometime at night, just lay in the bed if I couldn't sleep some nights. And it's just like, wonder, there's got to be something I can do. I don't have any experience in solving murders or anything like that, but it's my little brother and he's laying out there somewhere and nobody's doing anything. And it was just a simple little, this is what I can do to start. And, Chris got on there with me and he started, and then, some of the other families. So everybody has been really, a lot of them have been really involved. And then I remember when Bill found the page and he called me a couple of days later and we were having a conversation. When we finally talked on the phone the first time, I about cried. He said, you'll never believe what I do for a living. And and I was just, I was in tears on the other end of the phone. He didn't know that probably, but I was. It was like, oh, this is amazing, and the rest of the story.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after these messages. One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helped solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
Welcome back to Mind Over Murder. Well, and it's funny, if you Googled Keith's name, if you looked for Keith Call and put that into a search engine, that was one of the first things that showed up. And of course, the way I had seen the page, the Facebook page, was I was at my office and I was thinking about my sister. It was just about to be the 23rd anniversary of Kathy and Becky's death. And something came over me and I entered Colonial Parkway Murders into a search engine, and then stubborn Irishman kicked in, and I started reading every single article from beginning to end, whether I'd seen it before or not. And as I made my way through page after page of articles and news clips and video clips, I hit the Mike Mather story where he had broken the crime scene photos with Fred Atwell, and I know we want to talk about Fred. Over the course of that evening, as I read all these stories and watched all these video clips, I found the Keith and Sandy page on Facebook. And I was so impressed. It was like this resource, and people were talking about the case, and you all were commenting on it, and then you'd put up any new article and ask people what they thought of it. And so it became almost like a community bulletin board for discussion of Keith and Sandy's missing persons case. So it was really, really interesting. And then I wrote you all a message via Facebook, and I don't remember if you remember this, but I wrote this for the first time that night, and then I've written it hundreds of times since. What do I say? My name is Bill Thomas. I'm the older brother of Kathy Thomas, who together with her girlfriend Rebecca Dowski were the first 2 victims in the so-called Colonial Parkway murders. And I had no idea how your family was going to react because we had not been involved in the case for 23 years. We had stepped back and stayed very private, whereas your family and others in Virginia had been very outspoken. And, you'd been out there doing interviews and lobbying the State House, and you'd done so many different activities, memorials and candlelight vigils and anything to keep the attention going. I wasn't certain how you were going to react to hear from this guy. Like, I was afraid you were going to say, who the heck are you and where have you been for the last 20-something years? So I was very pleasantly surprised when you and Chris reacted so positively and you were so enthusiastic and welcoming, because I honestly had my fingers crossed when I finished typing that and I hit send. I thought, these people could just tell me to go pound sand.
We were like, come on aboard.
Now, Chris, is it true that you spotted the note on Keith's page?
I think it was me, yes. That was about 2010 or 11 or something like that. I think it was me.
Fall of 2009.
Fall of 2009. Yeah, I think I was the one. And I think and you put your phone number there, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, I probably did.
Or email address or something. And then we got in contact. And I remember we spoke on the phone. We spoke for quite a long time.
Started doing a little brainstorming about what we might be able to do.
Yes.
Joyce, when you started the Facebook page, had you ever heard of anyone using Facebook or social media for driving attention to an unsolved case like this?
I had not. I know I hadn't. I think I was just, why not? What do you have to lose, or what do we have to lose? No, I don't think I ever had, but I didn't really think that much of it. I just thought, I'm just going to put it out there and start putting information out there, and maybe people will start talking about it again, is what I was thinking, because I knew that it had been too quiet for too long.
And now that is so common for a lot of people when they first hear of a case that they're really interested in. One of the first things that they do is they go to check social media to see what's out there, and whether the families are involved and willing to, listen to tips or really just any sort of conversation they may have about it. I mean, you really set a precedent here. It is something to really be proud of, the kind of work that you guys have put into this. So hats off to you guys. This is incredible.
Joyce was cutting edge at the time.
I'm sure other people had done it too.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, we don't think so. We've talked to a lot of people trying to drive the same kind of awareness that you have done, and I think you might be the first. Joyce, you're a pioneer.
Well, thank you.
No conversation about this case can be complete before talking about Fred Atwell, who we have not yet done an episode on, but we fully intend to, and we're probably going to need more than one to cover all the wackiness and eccentricities of Fred Atwell. But can you guys speak to when you first met Fred Atwell and what he had to say the first time that he contacted you?
Okay, well, the first time I remember talking to Fred Atwell, I don't know the exact day or anything, but I know I got a random phone call out of the blue, and I did recognize his name. I answered the phone, and he said, "This is Fred Atwell, and I knew your dad and so, and he said, and he just went on. I mean, he didn't mince words. And he said that I have crime scene photos of the victims of the Colonial Parkway murders, and he told me about the class. I think it was a private investigating class or whatever over in Hampton, and that's where he had obtained the pictures, and that he was going to, I think he had contacted the FBI and he didn't hear back from them, or either they just paid no interest to him, which was something they probably regretted. But anyway, he was quite the character, is all I have to say. And then he did turn some of the pictures over, and I think was it Mike Mather or Andy Fox who?
And it was Mike Mather who ran with the story. Andy Fox knew about the crime scene photos, but it was Mike Mather from WTKR, the CBS affiliate, Channel 3. They're the ones that ran with the story about the crime scene photos being leaked.
Right. So that started a saga of a few years. And Bill, you're very familiar with all this. Just about daily interaction with Fred Atwell. And he was quite the character. And, I say this sometimes, he was very, very quirky. There are some days I really liked Fred, and other days I just did not know what to think of him. He was a character.
A number of people have speculated that Fred Atwell was involved in the Colonial Parkway murders. Based on your interactions with him and based on what you know of him, do you think that is possible?
I don't think, Fred, what you're asking, do I think that he murdered them? No. I do not. But do I think that he might know more than he ever come out and said? Yes, I do. I think that he was giving us a runaround for a long time. I don't know exactly why, if he was trying to lead us somewhere and he didn't want to be implicated. There's so many different scenarios. But, I mean, I don't know why he just inserted himself into our life one day, and he stayed there, and he wanted to know what was going on. And he called, and he talked to me, and he talked to Bill all the time.
Yeah.
And he would give us tips, and he would try to find out what we knew. And, you know, we were just kind of didn't really know what to think of him. But we would take all the tips in. We would take everything that he had to say.
We've talked about this several times, probably many times, Joyce. I always felt like I don't think that Atwell was involved directly in any of these murders or disappearances. But I think both of us thought that there was something he was trying to tell us, or that he always seemed to hold out the possibility of new pieces of information that he had access to. And I remember we were always thinking, can't he just get down to it and cough it up?
Exactly.
And you could never tell where the truth ended and the tall tales began. I've said before, Fred kind of reminded me, he was like a Southern Santa Claus. You know, he was a husky guy with a white beard. And man,
good old boy.
Yeah, he was a good old boy. And man, he knew how to spin a tale. But then I remember talking to you many times, Joyce, like circling back. Did you talk to Fred today? You know, that kind of thing. And we were always trying to figure out, there's got to be some truth in here somewhere, but we're having to sift through a lot of bullshit to get to the truth.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's like he was dangling something, a pot of gold or something, and we were trying to get to it. But as soon as we got closer, it'd pull it away. I don't know how to explain it. I feel like you do when it comes to Fred, that he knew more than he said, than he felt like he could say. And so he just danced around in circles.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, can I just say something?
Yeah.
I since I lived in Fort Lauderdale, still do, I would fly up like if they did a fundraiser or something. But I remember he would always bring his trailer behind his vehicle, and it would sell the hot dogs and hamburgers for the to raise money for the benefits and stuff. And I thought to myself, I would help them do that. And I was thinking to myself, what is he getting out of this? Why is he doing this? What's his connection? I could never figure it out. What's in it for him? I always thought like that. I appreciated it, but I always thought it was kind of strange.
Yeah.
He was a strange character. I'm still frustrated. I want to be clear here for our listeners. We're referring to Fred in the past tense. He died a couple of years ago in prison, actually, in a prison hospital. One of the things I was always hoping to do was go visit with him in jail. And Blaine Pardo, who wrote the book about the Colonial Parkway Murders, A Special Kind of Evil, the two of us talked about going out to see Fred in the western part of the state, if I'm not mistaken, when he was incarcerated, because we always thought, there's got to be something to this. And of course, like Chris, I was living out of town. I was living in California, so I wasn't in Virginia either. But I kept thinking, let's go visit with him and see if we can get him on tape or something. Just tell us what it is that you want us to know.
I think he liked the attention.
Oh, absolutely. And
yeah, I agree.
And Joyce, you used the word inserted. He did kind of insert himself in the case and even in our lives.
He did. Thinking back, from that first time that he called me out of the blue until all this happened when he disappeared and then got put into jail, for the most part, I bet he would call at least 3 to 5 times a week. I mean, every week we would talk, sometimes every day, sometimes a couple times a day. And I think he called you just as much as me.
Yeah, he would talk to me multiple times per week, sometimes multiple times a day. And he would email me articles constantly. He was very critical of the FBI, and the FBI clearly disliked Fred Atwell.
Clearly, yeah.
Atwell clearly disliked the FBI. There was a lot of not great history between the two of them. It's worth noting, by the way, at 2 different points, I mentioned to the FBI agent who was handling our cases, I mentioned that I was going to be meeting with Atwell at some point, and they twice asked me to wear a wire and record him without his knowledge. And I said, wait a minute, you guys have been telling us for years that he's completely full of crap and not to be believed. And I mean, they were very blunt. They said, stay away from Atwell. He's not credible. You shouldn't be listening to him. He can't be trusted, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, when I mentioned on 2 separate occasions that I was considering coming to Virginia and meeting with Fred Atwell, they said twice, would you wear a wire? And of course, I've never even been in a jail. And now I'm thinking to myself, how risky is this getting? Yeah, I'm now going to go to a jail, a place I've never seen anywhere except on TV, and I'm going to wear a wire to meet with a convict behind bars. I mean, the whole thing seems so crazy. And
That's like a movie.
Yeah, but I couldn't believe that FBI kept saying Atwell's not to be believed, don't listen to the guy, and yet they wanted me to wear a wire. So again, it's that, is there something out there in Atwell's stories that means something?
Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah. And now I was just looking up. Fred died December 2018, so it's a little over 2 years ago. And part of me, I don't know how else to put this, I'm still kind of mad at him for dying before we could have the conversation about, so Fred, what exactly are you trying to tell us?
And don't forget about the phony car raffle.
Oh, yeah. Tell us the story.
Yeah, tell us the story. Yeah.
But I think Joy's a little, well, I know that, go ahead, Joy. You probably know more about it.
Yeah. Well, let's see. How did that start? Well, we had done one raffle and then we were going to do another one. And he was the one that would think up these ideas. And it was like, okay, we can raise money. And basically, I just wanted to do it for awareness. And all the families would get involved. And it seemed like it was a fun time. And so the second time, I don't know, something wasn't seeming right to me. And I kept calling him to ask him some questions. For some reason, I had some questions about this car that he was going to raffle off.
Right. Supposedly, a local dealership had donated a car.
Right.
A Chevy Cruze or something.
He was supposed to have it out for people to look at one day or something like that. So if they wanted to buy raffle tickets, and he didn't show up, and he was really acting stranger, than usual.
Than usual.
Than usual. And so my Aunt Lou and I were talking about it, and I don't know what made me do this, but I called up the dealership that supposedly was donating the car that he kept talking about raffling off. So when I called there and I asked, I don't remember exactly who I talked to, but I talked to somebody who knew what was going on. And I asked about Fred Atwell and had they donated a car to the Colonial Parkway Murder Victims Fund on behalf of Fred. And they said, no, they had not. And then I was like, oh my God, he's lying about this. And then they told me that he had come, that's what he had done. He had come up there and test drove the same car.
Right.
And that's when they took it up to the drive-in for people to look at. And then he took it back. And so they did not donate that car. He had taken that car for a test drive.
Wow.
And that's how I found out. I called up there. And I was just, oh, my God, I couldn't believe that he did that. So I called him back. That's why he would never answer my phone calls after that. After he would call me almost every day. But then when that happened, all of a sudden he would not. I wasn't going to call the police on him at that point. I mean, we were talking about, what do we do about this? He can't do this. We were going to let him take care of this and make it right, But he had to go to the news media and make it a big, drawn out thing. And then he ended up, I think, having a nervous breakdown.
How much money did you raise, Joy? I forget.
I'm not sure right offhand. I think it was $2,000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
As I recall, at different times, the Virginia families had run successful fundraisers like fish fries and other raffles and that kind of thing over the years to pay for things like research, private investigators, and I think several years ago we were doing some electronic billboards, and we were using some of the funds that the Colonial Parkway Murders Victims Fund had raised over the years to pay for the electronic billboards. And then a question came up, as I recall, Joyce, I don't know if you remember this, that Atwell may have sold additional tickets at his little trailer, the one that Chris mentioned, where he would sell the hamburgers and hot dogs at events. He may have been selling perhaps even thousands of dollars of additional raffle tickets and not turning the money over to the Victims Fund.
I did hear that. I don't know how true it was, but I did hear that.
Atwell did have a history for years. He actually was a con man at one point, and I think once a con man, always a con man. It sounds like Fred was working a number of different angles. There was no car. It had not been donated. Thousands of dollars of raffle tickets for the car, which didn't exist, had been sold unwittingly by family members and supporters. Then we heard that Atwell may have sold an additional thousands of dollars worth of tickets without the family's knowledge and kept the money.
I know. I was so angry and hurt when I found out about that, because I thought in some small way, even though he was really quirky and everything, I thought he was a friend, as much as he could be. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I did believe it, but it was just, I don't know, but that was the last time I ever actually spoke with him.
Did he cut you off? Did he cut you off after that?
Okay, he tried to call right when he found out that we found out. Somehow he found out, I think the car dealership or somebody called and told him. And he tried to call initially, like 1, 2, 3 times after another. He just kept trying. And then all of a sudden, I never, actually spoke to him again after that. He went to the media on his own and started making up some wild stuff. And I mean, none of this he had to do. He could have worked. He had to pay the consequences for sure, but he could have done that privately. He didn't have to make a big, be chased down like he was. That was kind of like that happened. And then I think he had the problems at home. Right. And then they separated, and then he left and went on some wild up to Roanoke where he had that terrible episode up there, then Georgia, and he just kind of lost it.
Yeah. Supposedly his wife had kicked him out of the house, and then he went up to Roanoke and held up a woman. But this was someone his daughter, Crystal, actually knew.
Yeah.
He held this woman up, and she gave him a small amount of cash, and then she was going to write him a check. I think it was for $1,000 or something. Mm-hmm. And then he thought better of it. He did rob her, though. And then supposedly he's on his way to Georgia. He got arrested down in Georgia, involved in some sort of illegal gun sale.
Yeah.
And I remember,
he unraveled.
And I remember the FBI said to me, and again, this is the part that I always find kind of curious. The FBI agent said to me, we knew where he was going to be and when. The FBI agent kind of laughed in a little bit of a mean-spirited way, which wasn't really what this guy was necessarily like. It was like they were tracking Atwell the entire time. And then he got busted down in Georgia for this illegal gun sale, and then ended up being charged with all of these crimes, robbing the finance person who was a friend of his daughter's for, I don't know, $60 or something like that. It wasn't a large amount of money. The illegal gun sale, and then, of course, the fraud in the car raffle.
If I remember correctly, the woman in Roanoke didn't want to press charges, but law enforcement did want to, so they would not let her not press charges.
Right. I remember that. Even though the FBI continued to insist that they thought Atwell was not credible and didn't have anything to do with the Colonial Parkway murders, they did seem to want to put pressure on him to maximize the charges against him so that he ended up in jail with absolute certainty.
That's the way I saw it.
And then Atwell pled guilty. He didn't even fight the charges. He admitted his guilt and took his punishment, as I recall.
That's kind of not like him, though.
Yeah. The whole thing is very curious.
It is.
It's funny, Kristin, I know you said you can't have a conversation about this case without talking about Fred Atwell.
You really can't. And in a case full of colorful characters, I'd say he is certainly one of the more colorful ones.
He is that.
So ultimately, we are 33 years into this thing, and you guys did just pass. I always feel wrong calling these anniversaries. It is, I suppose, what they are. We just passed a 33-year anniversary for you all. What ultimately do you want to see happen in this case? People talk about a sense of closure, and we've all had the discussion here that we don't think closure is necessarily the right word. But what would leave your family ultimately with a sense of answers?
I guess, speaking for me, I would just like to, know where they're at, like to have, in that respect, I would like to know where they're at. And I would like to know, I don't necessarily need to know any of the gory details at this point, but I would like to have some accountability, that's for sure. I would like somebody to sit in jail for a long time.
Chris, how about you?
I would like to know who did it, and I would like to know where their bodies are. I don't know if we're going to see that in this lifetime, but that's what I'd like to know. It's been really hard. And I don't want to say that each year that goes by, it gets a little bit easier, but it gets kind of, it's always there. It's always like a thought away. It's always there. It's literally just a thought away in my mind 24/7 if I'm not thinking about it. But I would love to know. I'd love to know what happened. I would love to know the whole thing, actually. But
Mind
like I
Over
said, don't know if we're
Murder
going to
is a
see it in this
production
lifetime.
of
I hope.
Absolute Zero and
Who
Another
knows?
Dog
But
production.
I will say one
Our
thing,
executive
and
producers
Joyce and I,
are
we say
Bill
this
Thomas
frequently
and Kristin
to
Dilley.
each other.
Our logo art
We
is by
think that the
Pamela
FBI knows a
Unwell.
lot more than
Our
everybody
theme music
knows.
is by
And
Kevin
we
Oh, for
think
sure.
sometimes
Mind
it's like
Over
a
Murder
cover up.
is
It's
distributed in
like they really screwed
partnership
up
with
at the beginning, and the
Crawl
whole
Space
thing's a
Media.
cover up.
You
That's
can
just
follow
something
us on
we
Facebook,
discuss frequently
Twitter, or
about. You know,
Instagram.
You
we
can
kind of feel
also
that
follow
way.
our page on
Because
the
I used to
Colonial
think,
Parkway
here we
Murders
are,
on
we're
Facebook.
about 2.5 hours
And
away
finally,
from
you can follow
Quantico.
Bill
Like,
Thomas
you know,
on
that's
Twitter
where all
at Bill
the top
Thomas
FBI agents go to
56.
train. We're like,
Thank you for
and there's a
listening
CIA
to
training base right
Mind
there.
Over
And I'm like,
Murder.
we're going to have some good people. This case is going to be solved in no time flat. Now, 33 years later, hello, it's not.
I agree with Chris, and that's what we do talk about.
Chris and Joyce, thank you so much for joining us on Mind Over Murder to talk about your thoughts on the case and to honor your brother Keith. We appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.